Good evening. Welcome to the Church of the Redeemer. I'm so glad to see all of you here this evening. If you're new to us in any way, I'm especially glad to say hello and hope that we can get to know each other, if not tonight, in some future evening. This is a 5-part series this fall of speakers. Next week is Tim Baker, one of the prosecutors, Spiro Agnew. He'll be describing how that case unfolded with a sense that perhaps it offers insight to where we are today. But tonight, you're here to hear from Lawrence Lanahan. Lawrence Lanahan has master's degrees in sociology from AU and from Columbia University. He writes songs and performs them, get this, in a band called Disappearing Ink. He lives in Hamilton with his wife and 2 sons. You may know him and his work on the radio. He's worked in radio and print journalism for over a decade, including 5 years producing for WYPR. And he won a DuPont Award for The Lines Between Us, which was first a year-long multimedia series about inequality. As producer for Baltimore's public radio station, Lawrence inevitably waded into the social divides of race and class. But even after producing this 50-episode series on the topic, Lanahan seemed to feel he was skipping stones. He wanted to dive in, he said, and dive deep. The result is his sobering book, The Lines Between Us, which critics call a brilliant account of race and class, and say it, quote, brings humanity and heart to a guided tour of our fraught racial past and its enduring consequences. It's endearing, it's searing, it's unflinching. Context, as he began to write, was Ferguson, Missouri was fresh in the news. Freddie Gray was about to be. And he used his own backyard of Baltimore as a petri dish to explore the shackles of racism that bind the noble idea of an equal society. This text educates and enlightens us about the realities that define the shape of America's cities, says one reviewer. But he goes on to say, don't look for happy endings. From the afterword, Lawrence writes, as a white man, rather than yearn for the day I'm no longer racist, I must beware of the day when I think I'm no longer racist. America has always had this sickness, he says. The perversion of white supremacy and the violence of white nationalism is just what the symptoms look like right now. We must not abide it. So thank you for being here tonight to hear from Lawrence Lanahan.
Thank you for that exceedingly kind introduction. Thank you to Reverend Ware, everybody here at the Church of the Redeemer. Thank you all for welcoming me into your sanctuary, and welcome to those of you who are new. I see Tony Brandon's here, so I'm going to thank him for sticking his neck out to help the Lines Between Us radio program become a reality. So this is tough stuff. This is going to be a tough talk. I hope you'll stick with me. Before I get going, I want to show you a picture that I took the first week of school in 2012. I was driving through Catonsville, out in Baltimore County, and I was about 3 weeks from launching the first episode of The Lines Between Us on WYPR, so inequality was on the brain. So I took a picture of this after I drove by. Take a look at it for a second, chew on it. We'll come back to it later. So I'll tell you a little bit about the radio series. I started at WYPR in the beginning of 2009, and by 2011 I realized that the backstory to so much of what we were talking about, I worked on Maryland Morning, to so much of what we talked about was inequality in this region, the segregation that compounded it, and the structural racism that perpetuated it. And I thought, we had this very polite way of talking about it in the region within our separate worlds. And I figured, we got the airwaves, radio is free. I mean, WYPR's got a pledge drive right now, and I encourage you to support it. Technically, it's free. So, why don't we get this conversation on the air? And within an hour of the first episode airing, someone tweeted at us and said, I'm very excited about this Lines Between the series that WYPR is doing. I wonder how deep it will go in light of the producer being a white man. And I didn't swap back at all. I was thrilled because that is exactly the kinds of conversations I wanted us to be having in public, and not in private. The woman who wrote that was a guest on the program a couple months later. And so what I did with that series, what we did, WYPR would not me, so Tony's included. I wanted to show the landscape of inequality in this region, not the city. Because a lot of city problems, if you look into them, are regional problems. I know it's not people who live in the city who own the 2 vacants on my block. So we started with housing, and this is the series stuff here. We started with housing because that's just so foundational to segregation and inequality. What do neighborhoods mean to people? We talked about block busting in Edmondson Village, how Patterson Park was preserving its diversity. I ran some data and tried to figure out where's the middle class hanging on in Baltimore. And by the numbers, I found it up in northeast Baltimore, kind of around Hamilton. And I went up to Hamilton and I talked to 2 people. The man had just moved to Hamilton from East Baltimore. He loved it. He found an affordable house near Bel Air Road. He had a job with the Department of Public Works, overnight job. Low crime, he felt like, real quiet, and he loved it there. The other person was the president of the neighborhood association. She said the middle class was very tenuous in Hamilton, that people with white-collar jobs were taking second jobs at Walmart. Young families were leaving as soon as their kids turned 4, or else sending their kids to parochial school. So, one place, 2 stories. Depending on who you talk to, 2 stories about what the middle class is and what it means. We did a story about the racial wealth gap. White Americans have way more wealth on average than black or Hispanic Americans. So I talked to Joe Bacon. He was 88. He's a World War II veteran. He bought a house with a GI Bill in one of the few places he could. He did buy in a white neighborhood. That neighborhood was Mondawmin. He bought in 1950. By 1954, Mondawmin was a black neighborhood. And he was there for decades. And he got a bad home equity line of credit when he was older. And he went into foreclosure, and luckily his niece was making some good money, so she helped get him into assisted living, but she had to deal with his house. He bought the house with the GI Bill for $5,000 or $6,000 in 1950. They were getting short sale offers from the bank, different banks, $11,000, $20,000 in 2012. He died in 2013, 2 years before history started, on April 27th, 2015 in Mondawmin, when they shut down the buses and the subway when the schools were letting out. Now, I went on to cover employment barriers, the effects of the criminal justice system, educational inequality, just all the historic social and political forces that segregated the city, created racial disparities, and kept it that way. We commissioned some social scientists to do lots of maps so you could see what we were talking about. The light areas is where there is little racial diversity in this region. And so, after 50 episodes of this thing, I decided, here's the question I want to land on. What tools do local, state, and federal government have to dismantle the drivers of structural inequality? And we had an event at the University of Maryland School of Social Work Auditorium. We had some great guests. If you've ever read Nicole Hannah-Jones, an incredible reporter who writes about school segregation, that's her in the upper left corner. We taped this, broadcasted as the last episode. And I left WYPR after that series and to freelance, and I wrote a lot for Al Jazeera America. I did a story for them about how the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development was working with local governments, giving them data, giving them maps, so they could kind of figure out where their segregation was, where their barriers of fair housing was, what they could do about it. And I profiled this woman, Nicole Smith, who had moved using her federal housing choice voucher from Penn North in West Baltimore out to Columbia, the planned community that changed Charleston in Howard County. As part of fair housing, providing choices for low-income people all over the region, not just in poor segregated parts of Baltimore. Then I did a story on Christian community development. And this is a movement started by a civil rights movement veteran named John Perkins from Mississippi. And he says, if you want to help in a poor neighborhood, a segregated neighborhood, you need to have the same things at stake. He said, if you really want to help, live there. He said Jesus didn't commute back and forth from heaven every day. So you got to have the same things at stake. If they have felt needs in those neighborhoods, you're not going to feel them if you're not there with them. And there were like a dozen people, white and black, middle class, upper middle class, who moved from the suburbs into Sandtown in West Baltimore. I did this story in 2014. And so they're called relocators. And I did a story about them, and then after a while, I just thought, the radio series is kind of sprawling. What if I had a narrative, a story I could tell that could contain, everything I wanted to talk about? And so I thought, well, wait a minute. If I follow her from Penn North out to Columbia, and I follow this guy, Mark Lanahan, from Bel Air, in Howard County, into Sandtown, maybe that's the story. Maybe their stories will take us right into the forces that push us apart. Maybe if we see them cross the lines between us, we'll see them very clearly. And so in March 2015, I was teaching at UB, and they had an academic publisher come in to talk to faculty about book ideas they had, not to buy them, just to help them shape their ideas. And talk to him, how can I talk about all the stuff I want to talk about through these stories. And less than a month later, the police put Freddie Gray in that van in Sandtown. And so I kind of realized, this story is even more urgent than I thought it was. And I realized the structure of the book. I would write from the Fair Housing Act to the activism that followed Freddie Gray's death. Because in the late 60s, you had the Kerner Commission that President Johnson did. He wanted to know why were all the black ghettos rioting in the mid-60s. And turned out that white policy had created and sustained those ghettos and led to a lot of unrest. The Fair Housing Act in 1968 was supposed to change that. So I just write from what feels like history to what is today. I wrote from that up to Freddie Gray's death, and the unrest in a neighborhood that the Fair Housing Act failed to change. The Kerner Commission told us what was going to happen, and the Fair Housing Act failed to prevent it. And so I also decided to start reporting. We had this incredible moment after Freddie Gray's death of activism, this very, very civic urgency. Like, if not now, when? If not in Baltimore, where? Like, if we can't do this after Freddie Gray, is it going to get done? And so I started reporting, and what I chose to report on was a story in the city and a story in the county. And I reported on Port Covington. Under Arbor wanted some government assistance to build a new headquarters with retail and lots of apartments. And activists wanted something in return, including that some of their apartments were reserved for affordable housing, so anybody could live there. And then in Baltimore County, I reported on a settlement in a federal complaint. Some lawyers had said that Baltimore County had been practicing exclusionary housing policy for decades, and the county settled, and they promised to create 3,000 low-income housing opportunities in high-income areas. And the Port Covington story, to me, was a question of how are we going to develop the city, and for whom? And the Baltimore County story was how welcoming are the suburbs willing to be? And at the heart of both questions was the question, who benefits? I ask that every time I pick up a pen and pad. Who benefits? And that's a picture from the city council hearing for Port Covington. and that's the city council, all fuzzy in the background. And so the book, which I'll go get in a minute because I'm going to read to you from it, is it's the life of this metropolitan region in a way that refuses to look away from racial inequality and residential segregation. It refuses to let readers pretend that these problems don't exist, even if they've created a world for themselves where they don't have to see the problem. And so I'm going to stroll over here, get the actual book, come back and read to you from it. This is the prologue. Excuse me, it introduces some characters. Nicole Smith sat in her living room and flipped through the afternoon's television talk shows. A thin, easygoing 25-year-old with warm, dark eyes, Nicole savored the rare peace of quiet in the house. She was enrolled at Baltimore City Community College, but she didn't have class this day. Her younger sister was not at home. Her mother was out running errands. Her son, Joe, was at the after-school program at his elementary school a few blocks away. Outside on this winter afternoon in 2007, the sky was gray, the air was cold, and on the ground lay the remnant of a typical Baltimore wintry mix, a frustrating slush that turns the color of ash when it hits the street and piles up alongside the curb, styrofoam cups, and plastic miniatures of vodka protruding from her living room window. Nicole saw students walking past brick row houses with missing steps. With missing steps and boarded up windows. Across the street, the corner packaged goods liquor store with a little bar in the back, a staple along the major east-west North Avenue corridor, did steady business. Around 4:30 p.m., Nicole's mother, Melinda, came through the door. She stayed long enough to say hello and then left to run more errands. After Melinda walked out the door, Nicole heard what sounded like a gunshot from out in front of the house, then 4 more. Pop, 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 pop. Despite its grime and abandonment, this neighborhood had been a step up for the Smiths. Nicole, her mother, and her 2 younger sisters had lived in some of the most violent parts of West Baltimore, including Murphy Homes, a notorious public housing high-rise. Their new neighborhood still made the news for poverty, drug dealing, and violence, but trouble seemed to elude the Smiths here. People called them the Huxtables after the founding of the Cosby Show. Nicole's father had left when she was 3, but her mother still ran a tight ship. Melinda hadn't tolerated cigarettes or cursing. She knew who the girls' friends were and where they hung out. Even the roughest neighbors left the Smiths alone. Sometimes they sat on the Smiths' steps. They moved on when someone came out the door, a sign of respect. Nicole felt the neighborhood had deteriorated in the 12 years since their arrival, but nothing had hit this close to home. After she heard the gunshots, Nicole ran to the door in panic. As she scanned up and down the block for her mother, she saw someone run out of the corner bar. She picked up the landline and called her mother's cell phone, but no one answered. Then she noticed that her mother's car was no longer parked on the street. A sense of relief washed over Nicole as she realized her mother must have already driven away. Then the police knocked. Someone had been fatally shot in the head inside the bar, and police were canvassing the block for witnesses. "Did you hear the shots or see anything?" an officer asked. "I heard shots," Nicole said, and then someone came running out of the bar. "We might have to get you down to the station to question you," the officer said. Nicole blanched. She wished the police could just use her answers without making her testify. "No, don't come back and ask me nothing," she said. "I don't want to be part of that. I'm not going to no police station or court." The police moved on, and after about an hour, Melinda came back through the door. Normalcy returned, at least what was normal for this part of town. But the incident remained with Nicole. She wanted out. Every effort Nicole took to get out seemed to be met with an obstacle. She enrolled at Baltimore City Community College, hoping to transfer to a 4-year college and become a teacher, but administrators kept placing her in classes that didn't count toward her degree. She put in an application to the Housing Authority of Baltimore City for a rental unit in public housing or a Section 8 voucher, named for a program under which low-income households paid 30% of their income toward a rental in the private market, and the government paid the rest. A voucher offered the possibility of moving outside of the city. The Housing Authority's waiting list, however, included nearly 30,000 people. When her aunt told her about special vouchers she could use in the county, she applied but was rejected. Still, Nicole kept dreaming of getting herself and Joe out of the house and out of the neighborhood and into a community with safe streets and good schools. It was just a matter of how. Mark. Mark Lang and his next-door neighbor Kenny chatted on the sidewalk along Hunter's Run Drive, a long stretch of single-family homes amid the growing sprawl of the small town of Bel Air, Maryland. Mark's house and Kenny's house were nearly identical, a garage on the left side, a gabled roof with a louvered vent, a short concrete driveway wide enough for 2 cars, a square lawn bisected by a sidewalk, rows of vinyl siding and crisp gray shingles. Each house was an island of right angles and a sea of right angles, helping the neighborhood achieve a sense of order and propriety. Down the street, just 4 doors away, however, was a complete aberration. A house with half the square footage of its neighbors. Only 1 story tall, it looked like someone had shoved half of it into the ground. Not only that, but the owner was building an addition in the back with siding that didn't match the siding on the front. This, of course, had invited the threat of a lawsuit from the Homeowners Association. That house doesn't belong here, Mark said. Kenny agreed. Mark was born just after his parents moved out of his maternal grandfather's home in the working-class neighborhood of Brooklyn, about 30 minutes down Interstate 95 from Bel Air, just inside Baltimore City's southern border. That move, made in the late 1950s, was the first chapter in an uninterrupted story of upward mobility for Mark. The story was reaching its climax here on Hunter's Run Drive. Mark and his wife Betty had bought the house in 1987, and now, a decade later, he had finally started his own business. Mark had achieved the American dream, and it could only get better. A nice house in a safe, affluent neighborhood, zoned for good schools. A home like that was sure to appreciate the value. The nuisance house with the mismatched siding wasn't helping though. Mark thought it was worth 60% of what his or Kenny's house could sell for, 70% tops. It's not helping our property values, Mark said. Kenny agreed. Not long after that conversation, cognitive dissonance overcame Mark. An evangelical Christian, he knew what his very namesake had written in the Bible. According to Jesus, Mark 12:31 read, "The most important commandment after loving the Lord God with all your heart was thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." Mark considered what he'd said about his neighbor's little house. That, he decided, was not what Christ had been thinking. Mark didn't aspire to be Christ-like in a casual, what would Jesus do bumper sticker kind of way. You could see it in his intense, boxy face. He wanted his actions to be guided by the exact truth. If you misrepresented the truth or failed to live by what you claimed as your truth, Mark's estimation of you withered. Mark had found Jesus when he was 17. At that point, he began reading deeply, not just about Scripture, but about how the truth embedded in that Scripture should govern the way human beings treat each other. Dr. John M. Perkins, a veteran of the Civil Rights Movement, whose beatings by police in Mississippi still caused him physical pain decades later, captured Mark's imagination. Perkins argued that Christians who wanted to help the poor needed to live among them. It sounded radical, but in the mid-1980s, when Mark was moving to the house on Hunter's Run Drive, his best friend Alan Tibbles, another white Christian spelled Dr. Perkins, was moving with his wife and 2 little girls from an affluent neighborhood in Howard County to a renovated shell row house in Sandtown, Winchester, one of the most racially isolated, poor, and violent neighborhoods in West Baltimore. More and more, Mark's frictionless existence in Bel Air riled him. Why was his lifestyle afforded to so many white Americans and so many people of color were denied it? Why, he kept asking himself, was he born white in America? It had been a decade since Mark and Alan had moved to what may as well have been different worlds. Mark out to Bel Air, Alan to the inner city. In that time, Alan and his wife Susan and the pastor named Mark Gordon had helped start a multiracial congregation in Sandtown called New Song Community Church. During that same decade, Dr. Perkins had helped start the Christian Community Development Association. The CCDA asked its practitioners across the nation to have something personally at stake in efforts to bring economic development and social capital to struggling communities. Perkins believed that anyone who wanted to help a poor black neighborhood on a move there was rooted in what CCDA proponents call incarnational ministry, the idea that God became flesh and shared in human suffering. The CCDA helps its member organizations to build relationships within a community that bridge racial and economic divides, hoping development can grow outward from that foundation. What this meant to Mark Lang is that an infrastructure existed to help people like him move to places like Sandtown. New Song Community Church was a CCDA member. Alan began bringing longtime residents of Sandtown up to Mark's house to watch movies. Mark started visiting Sandtown to help New Song set up their IT system. As Mark felt himself pulled into New Song's orbit, an emptiness grew in him. Once again, he questioned the truth that he felt should direct his life. On top of that, he and Betty had been arguing. Part of it was about children. They'd had trouble conceiving, and Mark hadn't been willing to spend as much money on fertility treatments as Betty had been. But more generally, their worlds were drifting apart, and Mark was drifting towards Sandtown. "Why don't you move in with Alan and Susan?" Betty would ask me.
Lawrence, can you slow down?
Yes.
Our acoustic works against you. They
Okay,
They accumulate in that.
gotcha. I'll take them.
Thank you.
I have a monitor right here that makes me sound very clear. It's a big church, thank you. So, you've got a white family moving to Sandtown from Bel Air, a black family moving from Penn North out to Columbia. And what they represent, I mean, their stories are compelling, but what they represent in the book is a way to see two policies that are typically used to desegregate or at least deconcentrate poverty. One is place-based development. You pour a lot of money into a poor neighborhood and try to transform housing, schools, jobs, everything, health. Bring the opportunity to the place that needs it. Jim Rouse of Columbia and Mayor Kurt Schmoke in the 90s attracted tens of millions of dollars to Sandtown. And they wanted to make it a place where anybody would want to live. All right, that's place-based. And New Salt Community Church was doing similar things from the ground up there. The other approach is housing mobility. That you get people, it's an escape hatch. You get people out of these neighborhoods out to where the opportunity already is. And so you had Mark and Betty coming in so you could see what was happening in Sandtown. Nicole was an opportunity to tell the housing mobility story. The third storyline in the book, which is a civil rights lawsuit called Thompson v. HUD. It's the centerpiece of the book. It's a crucible in which both of these approaches to desegregation kind of play out and affect each other. What happened was, in the 90s, the city wanted to tear down high-rise public housing. Everybody across the country did. They wanted to replace it with mixed-income housing. And ACLU of Maryland said, well, you're going to tear that down. There's a new law, a federal law, that says you must replace every public housing unit you decommission. And when you build public housing, you segregated it in who got to live in which buildings and where you put them. And you have an opportunity 50 years later, because this was 95, to right a historic wrong. And so you all want to do mixed income with less density here where the towers were, okay with it. The other ones you have to replace, the counties need to take their fair share of public housing. And the counties weren't part of the lawsuit, so when they got wind of it, it got a little crazy. But after a year and a half, there was a partial settlement. And what the settlement did was create 1,300 special Section 8 vouchers, housing choice vouchers. You could only use them in places that were at least 75% white and no more than 10% poor. And they did, so this is a family, this is a class action lawsuit, 40,000 families. All you have to do is be African American and live in public housing or had lived in public housing. This is a family that lived in Lafayette Courts in East Baltimore. And here's one of those buildings going down. Those are all homes. And these are real people with real lives. And so those homes did come down. And so in the book, I followed this lawsuit. It goes 17 years. And the lines between us stand out in sharp relief in the book when you see how epic it is for these families to cross that, for this white family to move to Sandtown, for this black mom to move out to Columbia. And you see how epic it is for advocates and activists and lawyers to try to break down those lines. You see a century's worth of policies that push people to one side or the other of these lines. You see the organizing and activism and legal action that has actually dismantled some of these lines between us. But for all the epic efforts to develop poor, segregated neighborhoods and to create opportunities for those neighborhoods residents elsewhere, those epic efforts get comparatively little purchase. There are some successes, but there is a lot of work left. There's nothing like equity, across this region. And so that's kind of the book. And Reverend Ware asked me if I had any lingering questions after I finished the book, after I finished writing it. And I did. And I'll tell you a little story to illustrate that. When I launched this book in New York, I was interviewed by Noliwe Rooks. She's a professor at Cornell. She wrote a book called Cutting School about how segregation creates opportunities for profiteering, especially with schools. Like Edison Schools, this private company took over public schools in Baltimore and elsewhere, right? Did any white school district say, Edison, please bring your brilliant educational ideas to our district? No. So she talks about the opportunities for profiteering that segregation creates. And she said, so Lawrence, what are the lines between us? You know, I titled my book that. I couldn't say I don't know. She stumped me. And there's an easy answer and a hard answer. The easy answer is just this map. Yellow means low opportunity. Red means high opportunity. You take all these variables like low crime, high performing schools, lots of jobs, high income, etc. Mash them all together into an index of opportunity. You don't even need to look at it. You have this map in your head, probably. And so that's the easy answer. The lines between us are segregation, which compounds differences, inequality and differences in opportunity. And they're very clinical lines, and you put the data into the computer, and the computer makes a map, and policymakers decide what to do, and mostly what they do is think about how to move people one way across the lines, from little opportunity to more. Okay? There's a deeper way to think about the lines. And so when Naliwe and I were talking before the event, she said, have you read W.E.B. Du Bois' The Souls of Black Folk? And I was like, yeah, like 20 years ago. And she's like, do you remember the veil? The symbol in the book, the veil. And I went back and read my Du Bois. And this symbol comes up again and again. He actually phrases it once as, quote, the veil that hung between us and opportunity. And he wrote that 100 years ago. And he talks about transcending, it's the color line he's talking about. And he talks about transcending the veil through learning. And this is just such an amazing quote. I want to read it in full from Du Bois. He said, I sit with Shakespeare, and he winces not. Across the color line, I move arm in arm with Balzac and Dumas. I summon Aristotle and Aurelius, and what soul I will, and they all come graciously, with no scorn nor condescension. So, wed with truth and dwell above the veil. Is this the life? Right? Is this the life you grudge us, O knightly America? Is this the life you long to change into the dull red hideousness of Georgia? Are you afraid, lest peering from this high Pisgah between Philistine and Amalekite, we sight the promised land? Wed with truth, I dwell above the veil. Okay? And I think about the veil, and I think about what it looks like to cross the lines the other way. From where there is opportunity to where there is less. And I think about those relocators who move to Sandtown, who begin to put things at stake that people who are already living there have at stake, who start to feel the needs that are felt there, who, through community organizations like Sandtown Habitat for Humanity, through the church, bind souls. These people bind souls together. The veil is still there, but it is a really remarkable community. And that veil asserted itself that night when I did the book event with Naliwe. I said something like, this inequality is unsustainable. And she said, she'd seen nothing to convince her that it was not sustainable. She thought white America could sustain inequality. And I said, fair enough. I was not seeing things like she'd seen them, because I was not behind the veil. And, the lines are everywhere. I mean, this is a sanctuary, and you've welcomed me into it, but even in a sanctuary, the lines run right through here tonight. Does this room look like this city? If it doesn't, what does that mean to you? And it may mean something very different, depending on what side you're on. Lots of places I go. I'm sure here tonight there's, wealth and power and influence. Wealth in this region, in most American regions, wealth follows whiteness. It just follows it. Right? Do good schools mean higher home values, or do higher home values mean good schools? What are they saying with this? Come, people with money. Let's make our own. Let's have our own school here. Okay? The whiter the place, the more folks have to lose materially, and the quicker they close ranks, even if they're well-meaning. In the book, and since I finished the book, you see it over and over again. When low-income housing is proposed in a high-income area, when a school district even ponders redrawing its school boundaries. People deploy power, wealth, and influence to keep these current structures in place. And you might say, Baltimore has black leadership in the city. Take a look at this. When you look at all the campaign donations to the city races, mayor and council, 43% of those donations come from outside the city. 64% of that money comes from white donors, 64% and 63% black city. And this doesn't mean we all don't like to help. We all like to help. And that's another lingering question that I had, that I tried to address in the book, and it stuck with me. What does it mean to help? Because when we desegregate or we deconcentrate poverty through policy, whether it's moving people to the suburbs, transforming a neighborhood in the city, the burden is mostly on people of color. We expect little of white communities, especially outside the city. If you're black and in the city and your neighborhood's being or you're part of this housing building, you are moving away from your world, your schools, your churches. If you stay during the disruption of your school's curriculum, buildings are being demolished and built up, maybe you're getting displaced because too many people are moving in. You know, the question I keep landing on, and I wrote about recently, is what is the obligation of the white person in a region that was segregated for his or her benefit? And I don't want to make people too uncomfortable. This is not about white guilt, which is sometimes what people say to me. Guilt is useless. Guilt is about the past. It encompasses but one tense, the past. Responsibility captures the past, present, and future. And so there's a distinction that I want to draw regarding helping, regarding dismantling segregation and racial inequality, regarding destroying white supremacy. And that's another word that makes people uncomfortable. I'm not talking about white supremacy that happens under a white hood. There's a kind that happens behind the desk. Supra in Latin means on top, above. And as white supremacy is more and more commonly understood these days, it is as a system that keeps white people on top. It's the structures that reinforce the political, economic, and social domination of white people. And when you don't act to disrupt that system, it perpetuates itself. It's on autopilot because we programmed it so long ago and we never deprogrammed it. White supremacy is what trains Americans with means to view the well-being of their children as inherently in conflict with the common good. We don't need to acquiesce to that equation, but to challenge it means to give up power, wealth, and influence. So, before I make this distinction about how we help, I want to read a very brief passage from the book. This happened very recently. So, the vandalism, looting, and arson of April 27th had hit Sandtown harder than any other community in Baltimore. Before sunup, someone had created a Facebook event called Baltimore Cleanup Effort. The event page suggested that people take cleaning supplies to North and Pennsylvania avenues, the heart of the chaos, where a CVS pharmacy was looted and burned. More than 2,000 people, many of them white, some from outside the city, responded that they would attend. Contentiousness arose in the comments section of the online event page. Quote, "It seems like the majority of these people are from outside the community, i.e. white students or people who have never seen this community," wrote one commenter, a young black college student from West Baltimore. "This event should be spearheaded by black people of the West Baltimore community and no one else. Know your place, white participants. This is not a trip to the museum." Some white commenters reacted angrily. Why, they wondered, that you needed to make it about race. Some misinterpreted the comment as dissuading white volunteers from coming at all, and they said they would take their help elsewhere. One quoted Rodney King nearly verbatim, "Can't we all just get along?" If the lines between Baltimoreans had broken down the night before, and indeed even people in safe neighborhoods had felt anything but, the lines were already reasserting themselves as some white commenters painted all black Baltimoreans with a broad brush. "Let them clean their own mess up," one woman wrote. "You're literally the epitome of a racist," wrote It was an old Baltimore story in the new guise. Poor and rich, white and black, indicating good intentions, but talking past each other. This time it transpired in a crucible, like the region hadn't seen since the riots after the 1968 assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The cleanup happened. I was there. It was incredible. It was beautiful. Neighborhood leaders were in charge, and they ran a smooth, effective cleanup. The residents knew to tell them what needed cleaning. Hey, Mrs. Johnson says 1600 Block Preston has some broken glass. You. 2 brooms, 2 dustpans. Here's a bag. You guys go down to Mrs. Johnson. This other neighborhood leader will take you there. All right? So this is a prayer circle that happened before the cleanup. Speaking of Dr. King, he has that line about white and black kids holding hands. You know, what a day that'll be. The day after this cleanup was over and all those people left, how far do you think the little black girl in Sandtown would have to walk to find a little white hand to hold? How long? She'd get called back before dark, probably. We're not going to solve this at the individual level. Our hearts need to be in the right place, but that's not enough. Holding hands is not going to do it. This is systemic, and this is the distinction that I'm drawing between individual and systemic problems. It's not just about racist people doing racist things or saying racist things. It is about when we create and abide policies and practices that disproportionately benefit people who already have disproportionate power, or when we disproportionately harm those who have less. So the main distinction I want to draw, and we're going to wrap up here in a second, is between transactional and transformative change. And the analogy I use is a soup kitchen. They're necessary. You give 50 cans to the soup kitchen, and that feeds 27.8 families for 2 nights or whatever. Those 50 cans are gone, and the need is still there. Nothing has been transformed. Another example is that Baltimore County settlement that I was telling you about. The county agreed to make 3,000 low-income units happen in high-income areas. 3,000 families get that opportunity. That's great. Will they continue to create those opportunities once those 3,000 are done? Is there an incentive in the bureaucracy to do that? There was another part of the settlement where the county executive had to introduce a bill to the council that would ban discrimination based on your source of income. That would mean a landlord could not say no Section 8 on the ad. He had to look at everybody's. If that had passed, that would have institutionalized acceptance of low-income families in high-income areas. That would have been transformative. It went down 6-1. There will be another vote in about a month or 2, because they're requiring the settlement to keep trying. And for Under Armour, I remember I said the activists wanted something in return for Under Armour getting government assistance. What Under Armour wanted was a $535 million tax increment financing package. What that is the city floats $535 million in bonds, right, to pay for the infrastructure, all the stuff to help them build it. And Under Armour just, instead of paying property taxes on this huge new city within a city, they pay down the debt on the bonds. Maybe 40 years they finish and they start paying property taxes. And activists wanted something in return. And under pressure from activists, Under Armour promised $100 million to benefit the residents of Baltimore City, mostly in its poor black neighborhoods. That's unprecedented. That is gobs and gobs of money, the likes of which I will never lay my eyes upon in this lifetime. They gave some of what they have. What proportion of what they have does that represent? That's probably on a ledger somewhere, but I don't know. Now, $100 million is nothing to sniff at, but at the end of the day, it is a transaction. And when that money's gone, you have to think about how much will have changed. They were willing to part with some of what they have, but what they were not willing to do was promise to keep some of the housing within this new neighborhood affordable. They said we'll do 20% affordable housing, but there were loopholes. If we can't do it on site, we'll do it off site, elsewhere in the city. If we do it off site, we'll try not to do it in concentrated poverty neighborhoods. We'll try. And actually, if it's not financially feasible to build units, we won't create any affordable units at all. We'll just give the city a bunch of money for their inclusionary housing fund. said they will not promise to make room in their built-from-scratch community. That would have been transformative. James Rouse did it. Columbia was open to all races. James Rouse intervened at the street level to create racial mixes in Columbia in the 60s. He wanted economic diversity. He said, I want the janitor and the CEO in this town. And in 1966, before Columbia really got going, Jim Rouse introduced Cardinal Sheehan to a city council hearing at the War Memorial Building, the same place that Under Armour had done. And Rouse and Sheehan were supporting an open housing bill in the city. This is 2 years before the Fair Housing Act. And there were 2,000 people there, and a third of the crowd booed him. They booed a cardinal in 1966 in a Catholic city. And the message is certain races belong in certain places. To some degree, that's always been the message in this region, in American metropolitan regions. No one said it out loud about Port Covington, okay? What they did say was, when they were applying for the TIF and the applications, we want to attract the creative class. The guy who came up with that term, Richard Florida, also did the research and said the creative class is less than 10% black. They said they wanted the highly educated millennials and baby boomers. You're getting a picture of who's going to be living in this place. In a 64% black city, whatever the makeup of this neighborhood is going on a peninsula that's 88% white. If there are no affordable rentals in this new city within a city, how many black renters do you realistically think you're going to get in Baltimore? Is this neighborhood going to have enough kids for a new school? I mean, with empty nesters and rich 20-somethings, maybe not. But if it does, will someone from East or West Baltimore be able to move there, get their kid into the school? I mean, white people have been known to move for school districts. And you can tell by the ruckus when you hear about school boundaries changing, even though realtors cannot sell the rights to determine school boundaries. Port Covington will probably double down on the lines between us, perhaps in permanent marker. There's just not much that is rousing about all of this. At the council hearing, when they were trying to get their TIF, they projected their employee growth. Just, we're going to be hiring. And the spokesman said, it's grow here or grow somewhere else. Like, we will leave if we don't get to do this the way we want. Another story right out of the book. I talked about that cleanup. And one of the leaders of the cleanup was Ray Kelly. Ray Kelly had been pressing for police reform well before anybody knew who Freddie Gray was. And here's what I saw him tell a large group of volunteers on this day. He said, quote, 1,000 people maybe came out to support our community today, and we need to take all of these people to the polls so we can change this once and for all. My goal when we said we were going to do this effort was to make sure that our residents are in every part of this restructuring, from picking up the first piece of paper off the ground to the day they signed that bill in Annapolis. He was talking about going from transactional to transformational change. Another interesting quote from around that time is from Davon Love. He does research and policy analysis for Leaders of the Beautiful Struggle, a group that advocates for Baltimore's black residents. And what Davon had also been advocating for police reform well before Freddie Gray died. And what Ray Kelly said about people who crossed the lines to help clean up, Davon said about those who came to West Baltimore to protest after Freddie Gray died. How many of them, he asked me, will get themselves to Annapolis for a hearing on a police reform bill at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday? Protests capture our imagination. Cleanups are necessary. $100 million will touch a lot of individual lives. Let's appreciate the symbolic action and the transactions, but I invite you to ask yourself, what is your role in the transformation? What does it mean to help? When will we stop pretending and face the truth about our region? And what would it entail to wed ourselves to the truth, all of us, and dwell above the veil together? Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming. I will take questions.
Thank you very much for your hard work. So
Ray Kelly, of whom I think the world of Ray Kelly. He is a true community organizer for people who don't know, and he started the No Boundaries Coalition, which is a very important organization in West Baltimore that attempts to go across Utah Street. If you want to do something that really is supported, we're having a gala at Westminster Abbey down at the University of Maryland in November. Ray was also given, which did not get a lot of publicity, the Catholic Church's International Award 2 years ago, which was worldwide, and a grant for doing the most for any community there was to do. He comes from the streets. He's built up an organization. He's doing something with the consent decree too. So No Boundaries, which is over on, they do a fundraiser. They do
A great block party.
a great block party, and over there too in Town is the greenhouses where they always need volunteer help. So there are these little pockets that are not necessarily like big things. But Ray Kelly is just fabulous. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, when I went to report at the cleanup, I walked up to him because I wanted to interview him. I had a pad out, and I hear him say to everybody, "We don't want any press. We don't want any coverage. We just got to get this work done." And I was like, "Oh man!" And I walked up to him and I said, "So I'm a reporter. Can I follow you around?" And I was like, "Grab a broom." And I still reported on him. I got to report, but I've been in touch with him since. But he is extremely impressive.
Thank you for your book. I finished reading it last night at midnight, so great book.
Thank you.
So I'm from Baltimore, and I'm someone who grew up in flag house projects. 1968 riots. My mom, was 5 of us, and my mom, after the riots, my grandmother got us out of flag house into Cedar Property. So we were white, so we had that opportunity in which to do that. But we were one of the last 2 white families in flag house projects in 1968. We went to St. Leo's, so my mom went through a lot of effort to get us through schools, but we were privileged in that way. She worked night shift in Mercy Hospital for 30 years, to put 5 kids through Catholic schools. And thank God to my grandmother who got us out in the flag house project. But I also have worked the past up until Senator Foster retired. I've worked for her for 20 years. And I want to talk about Code 6 development. We talked about, Murphy Homes redevelopment, flag house projects, Lafayette Square. And one of the things Senator McCloskey said about the problem here in Baltimore with Code 6 redevelopment was that as compared to other cities like Atlanta, who had taken a comprehensive approach to redevelopment for their Code 6 projects, in Baltimore, all it focused on was housing. There was no community development. There was no grocery stores around. There was no CVS pharmacies. She said it was full of why pay less point grocery stores. The ones you're talking about where you buy your cigarettes for $1, that sort of stuff. And there was no comprehensive plans for schools. And so, in your book, you talk about the reinvestment in these communities, but Baltimore really failed with any kind of comprehensive plan in which to do that. I wonder if you could speak about that, son.
Yeah, what you're seeing now, I'm going to go just a little afield from this, but it's a really important point. There's place-based development that you're talking about, and there's housing mobility to get people out. Both have their benefits, but they get pitted against each other because there's so few resources. So developers who are building affordable housing in the city are like, stop moving people away, and people who are trying to get people out of the counties are like, stop resegregating. And so now, more and more, when you want federal investment for place-based development, you have to have a comprehensive community plan. Like that's a box they check off and give you points if they have that. And I didn't compare Hope 6 to Atlanta and other places that did it. Baltimore, that's a really good point because Baltimore gets touted as like this, pioneering model Hope 6 thing. They only did mixed income in 2 of those 4. But there's Murphy Homes and Lexington Terrace on the west side, there's Lafayette Courts and Flag House on the east. And it was all tied up in a consent decree. What they could do and what they couldn't do. The city was fighting with the ACLU about what could happen. And so they only got mixed income into 2 of them. The whole idea of Flip 6 was mixed income. And I thought I remember them getting like a rating or something over whatever they replaced Lexington Terrace with, but that's a good point, that housing is not it. And here's another point. So in Sandtown, right, I kind of contrast the top-down Jim Rouse, Kurt Schmoke thing, $130 million, whatever it was, with New Song Community Church and Sandtown Habitat for Humanity. Rouse and Schmoke used the federal Nehemiah Homes program to put like tons of new affordable houses in Sandtown. Only 20% of them went to people from Sandtown. The rest went to low-income people. It's fine, it's good. They're still good houses. But nobody had relationships with the people in those houses. But the church had their own Sandtown Habitat for Humanity. They built 300 houses in about 15 years, but they had relationships with everybody. And that is another balance you have to strike in doing this. Like, building the houses is not enough. What else do you do? I mean, man, that's up for debate. I mean, there's so much that needs to be done. The Rouse Schmoke thing, they changed the curriculum at 3 schools. They, but then little New Song Community Church got a primary care health thing going. Like, it's a little church, sick people could go see a doctor. So there was so much that needs to go into place-based community development. And right now, everybody's cheering on housing mobility. They've moved 4,400 families out of the city to opportunity-rich neighborhoods, mostly in the counties, because of Tom to be HUD and some of the programs. And people look at Baltimore like, wow, that was not easy. I mean, people in the counties freaked out. Really, really freaked out when this started happening. Now it doesn't really cause as much of a stir. But it took 30 years of organizing, street activism, lots of legal action to even get those families out. And that success, there's a model for doing that now. The place-based development, they still haven't figured that out. They still have that. There are some successes, but by and large, they haven't figured that out. Thank you for sharing your experience about Flag House. I've talked to other people who have lived there, and that was a white project, you know. And when things desegregated, it ended up turning over. But it was families, public housing. People have such weird ideas about what it is, and it's a lot of working people, and you do pay rent. That's just a certain percentage. Thank you. Any other questions?
Oh, I wanted to say something about the Baltimore City Public Schools. I made my career in the city schools as a guidance counselor. And I guess about the 70s, they decided that they wanted to desegregate their schools. So they divided the city into, they just made pie wedges in the city. And sent the kids, they bused them and so forth, sent them out to the end of the pie. So the kids were bused, the kids were more desegregated. The thing that happened was that the kids who were left behind had a smaller group and they did well, and the kids who were bused were in a strange environment and they didn't do as well. So it was sort of a mixed experiment in that way. I thought they had the right idea.
Right. Well, it's just housing and school segregation are so intertwined. And what happened ultimately was white flag, right? And there's a Supreme Court decision in '73 that said, unless you can prove that somebody's intentionally doing race-based discrimination across county and city lines, you may not do a metropolitan solution to school segregation. So folks leapfrog across that line, and there's not a whole lot you can do. But yeah, the busing is a function of where people choose to live. I just saw a report from the Gallup did a poll and about segregation, school segregation, and a majority, 2/3 of people said they support putting low-income housing in high-income areas. You wouldn't know that from going to a public hearing, but that's the mandate. And a majority of people support redrawing school boundaries. Again, you wouldn't know it. So, there's a mandate for this stuff. We cannot figure out how to do it, but housing is so key to it. Housing is so key. Thank you for your question. Yes, sir.
There's a problem in Baltimore, which is an extraordinary history of real progressive innovation in the service of segregation. Know where the first community in the country was to have restrictive covenants? Well, in part. You know where the first city in the country was to enact racial segregation by lot and location? Right here, folks. And I think it's very easy, relatively speaking, to talk about how difficult this is, how there are things that can be done. It is very hard, and I have been watching David trying to get this congregation to talk about their roles, not the deplorable fact that there is community segregation, but the roles of the people in the pews here and the way in which they benefit from white privilege and parents and grandparents and great-grandparents benefit from. And until we can figure out, not as a sufficient explanation, but as a necessary part of it, how to get us talking about that, I think it's going to be very hard to get the kind of change you're talking about.
Yeah, if we can't talk about it, it's not going to change. And I'll tell you the secret trick I did in my book. I started in 1910. So Answer Piatilla already wrote Not My Neighborhood. So I wasn't going to mess with like the first two-thirds of the 20th century. He did a great job with segregation laws and restrictive covenants and everything. But I summarized it. So I started the book in 1910. Baltimore had the country's first law that said white people can't move to black blocks and vice versa. Supreme Court overturned that. Then we had racial covenants, you can't sell to blacks and Jews. Supreme Court overturned that. Well, I just write from 1910, and I write, 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 and then it's today. I didn't stop with the bald-faced bigotry of the 1950s. I kept going as it became more covert. And when you write from 1910 until today, it challenges the reader, the skeptical reader, tell me, what day did this stop? Was it May 17, 1954, when Brown versus Board came down? Which, to Baltimore's credit, Walter Sondheim got a vote on right away. Was it April 11, 1968, when we passed the Fair Housing Act? Was it December 8th, 1980? Was it 5 years ago? When did it stop? When did America deprogram itself? And I'll tell you what, the straight up white supremacy has come out of the woodwork in the last 3 years. And I was a little bit naive, and I say this in the afterward. I thought, I didn't have like the post-racialitis that everybody seemed to have when Barack Obama got elected. This is a post-racial book. I wasn't really that fooled that we were going there. But I started writing this 2014, 2015, and I think, well, outright white supremacy has been sufficiently marginalized that I can write a book about structural racism. I can write a book about disparate impacts, de facto segregation, which some people would argue there is no de facto segregation. Let's take a look under the hood of our society and look at the gears, and because that stuff is marginalized. And Charlottesville happened while I was writing the book. The guy who took a bus from Hamden to New York and killed a guy with a machete happened while I was writing the book. And I don't want to spoil anything, but the book ends with a black person watching white people argue about what's white privilege and what's white supremacy in Hamden. And what was happening was people would say, "Hate free Hamden, you're welcome here." Talk to black people about going to Hamden. Most of them don't feel welcome there, even today. I took a couple of black friends to a bar like 10 years ago, and we were there 15 minutes, and my friend was like, "Can we go to your house?" So, talking about it, and that's why I'm trying to provoke you all a little bit tonight, is that there is a level that we have not reached in this region of sort of moral courage and intellectual honesty about what's really going on. And I really appreciate your comment.
This will be the last question.
So I believe there are cities like St. Louis that have somehow combined the city and the surrounding suburb. Have you looked at that?
Yeah, I'm on that right now.
And how do they make that happen?
Well, it blew up in St. Louis's face. It's not really happening. The guy who was going to be the mayor, the metropolitan mayor, turned out to be insanely corrupt, like bragging on the phone about how corrupt he was. That all blew up. But they tried. They tried. Nashville, I think, did this. And there's other regions like Hartford that have at least done it with the schools, done regional solutions. Part of the reason some of these places do it is we're kind of lucky in a way. When you do fair housing stuff, you gotta like convince Baltimore County, Harford County, Anne Arundel County. You don't have to convince Howard, like they retain some of those routes and values. Whatever, you just have a handful of counties to deal with. St. Louis has like 90 municipalities that you gotta deal with out in St. Louis County. Cleveland has about 59. And so what I see is the more metropolitan merger talk is happening in places with all these municipalities because it's inefficient, they compete with each other for economic development, they're right down the bottom of the barrel. That's what happened in St. Louis. That's why black people were getting jacked up on jaywalking and all these fees and fines. Like when they studied why Ferguson happened, it's because white people, when they did white flight, white people moved out to St. Louis City, incorporated the town. Black people moved in, they moved out further, incorporated another town, and then they had 90 towns. And then they started arresting black people for stupid stuff. And so that's part of what happened there. We're very different. And I can't imagine who would lead a metropolitan push here or why, because one thing that happens is the black political power gets diluted. You know, once you put the city and the county together, then you've got people out in the county who only know the city from TV and want nothing, to do with it. They think, I don't know, the squeegee kids are going to invade them or something. I mean, that's how we talk about this, right? Like, the only way we know how to talk about this as a region is like, should Squeegee Boys be in the corner and should Mary Booble be on the TV news? Like, we pick these really fraught, symbolic things, and we don't deal with this. And I tell you what, my phone rang off the hook in July when President Trump started talking trash about Baltimore. I was in the New York Times twice in one day, even after telling them, here's 10 black people you should talk to. And I was on the radio in San Francisco, all this stuff, and I had to talk about it on his terms. And I resented that. I had worked for 3 years to bring a sophisticated analysis to bear on it, and it's like, you guys are rats. Yeah, we got rats. But we're so quick to latch on to some symbolic thing as a way of talking around what we really need to talk about. I went bonkers on Twitter a couple weeks ago because Fox 45 did a story. The story was, this guy got in an altercation with squeegee kids, so he moved to Lancaster. White people mad at black kids moved to southern Pennsylvania, film at 11. I mean, talk about ignoring every bit of context you could possibly include. And so I just went nuclear on them and tore that story apart. We have such a terrible way of talking about things around here sometimes. That's a terrible note to end on, but there are ways for us to talk about this. I encourage you, I interrogate myself every day, and like you said from the back of my book, I don't long for the day that I'm no longer racist. I beware of the day I think I'm not. Whiteness and white supremacy benefit me every day, and this is a fight that people have to fight internally and externally every day, but we can do it. Thank you so much.
Lawrence, thank you. I think I can safely say that the people in this room want to talk about it, and
Yeah.
I spend as much time as I can in rooms with people that want to talk about it. Thank you so much for being a piece of that and leading us to talk about what we've got to talk about.
Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you all so much. Sign go to the back. We want to hang out and chit-chat.
It's in a negative way. You're not doing it to flatter them. You're doing it because they're different.